G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. We're talking 10:05. Late Night Live is about to start, and as far as I know, they're going to talk about the Murray-Darling Basin and the fish kill.
And welcome, beloved listeners, to LNL. Tonight we will be discussing dead fish. We're off to look at a problem, a considerable problem between China and New Zealand, and we're going to round the evening off by looking at dramatic changes in the copyright laws, which might prove quite exhilarating. But first of all, last night we were chattering about how to get on better when you're very, very old, 9 weeks at the farm, which is asphyxiating from drought. The homestead is on the juncture of two rivers, or ex-rivers, the Isis and the Pages, and now reduced to a couple of stagnant pools that have destroyed even the tenacious European carp. I can remember, however, some years ago when we regularly had algal blooms because of overuse and abuse of the two rivers' flows. And I vividly recall the first great algal bloom back in 1991, in which it was one of the first indicators that all was not well in the Murray-Darling. Numerous inquiries, reports ad nauseum, scientific investigations later. The Water Act was established in 2007, and the Murray-Darling Basin Plan implemented after a fashion in 2012. Billions of dollars spent on water reform. Despite this huge spend, we were all shocked to see the images of thousands, some say millions of fish dying in the Menindee lakes. My next guest was not shocked. He saw this environmental disaster coming and has some suggestions for how to stop it happening again. All hail Quentin Grafton. Quentin's a professor at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the ANU and director of the Centre for Water Economics, Environment and Policy. Welcome to the program, Quentin, and thanks for taking time off from your vacation to do so.
Very happy to be here, Philip, and thanks for the invitation.
Quentin, before we get into the background of the recent disaster, what were the immediate triggers that killed the fish?
The immediate cause was a lack of oxygen or dissolved oxygen in the water. And fish, just like people who live on the land, they do need oxygen, and it has to be dissolved in the water for them to be able to breathe. So what happened was there was a blue-green algae outbreak. That was because of high temperatures, a lack of flow, for example. Then there was a cooling period that killed off a substantial amount of the algae. That led to bacterial development. That led to reduction in the oxygen in the dissolved water, which led to the asphyxiation of hundreds of thousands, possibly 1 million plus fish. And so that is essentially what happened. The fish kill was the immediate cause, was the lack of flows, lack of oxygen as a result of biological processes.
Now, of course, our political masters and the irrigators and the authority are all blaming the drought for the disaster. That must have turbocharged it.
Well, clearly we're a land subject to drought, so we do have extremes. We have floods and we also have droughts. So in the drought periods, things get worse, they get exacerbated. So there's no question that's true. But it's also true that we need to prepare for droughts. It's not like droughts are a surprise for us. We've been living on this continent, if we include our first peoples, for 40, 50, 60,000 years. So we have to be prepared for it, and we have to be resilient to those sorts of shocks. And clearly we're not. And you raised the point, Philip. We've been preparing, supposedly, with the Basin Plan that was passed in November 2012. We have $13 billion allocated since 2008. Multiples of billions, not millions, multiples of billions of dollars have been spent in terms of water infrastructure, yet we haven't prepared for these sorts of events. So clearly we've got it wrong. Clearly we're not doing the right thing. And clearly we need to fix it and do something different. And this is just an example of other disasters that will unfold in the years or months to come, not just in terms of the Menindee Lakes and the Darling River system. It'll happen on the Murray. It'll happen other places. Indeed, it already is happening, perhaps not as visible as can be seen in terms of a bunch of Murray cod the 50 years old that are dying and dying in a river.
The Murray-Darling Basin Plan. Let's talk about environmental flows. They're far too low.
They most certainly are far too low. So we have a process going back many years, and there's always going to be disputes about, well, how much do we actually need for the environment? And you'll have people from the irrigation interests, and not all irrigators, I have to say, are against environmental flows, but you'll have a particular set of interests saying, no, we want to keep the water for extractive purposes, which is principally irrigation. And then you'll have the other side saying, well, actually, that's not enough. We don't get enough flows at the Murray Mouth. We're dredging at the Murray Mouth and have been for years. We have the fish killed we just talked about. So what we need to do is to put some science in here rather than just debate about
science in this country.
Yes.
We don't trust scientists, Quentin.
Well, yes, I think scientists who tell the truth are viewed as untrustworthy by some people.
I think our politicians would like to see lots of dead scientists bobbing in the river.
Yes, they might have my name on it as well, but the fact is, the truth may hurt, but the truth is the truth. And for a number of years now, we've had public servants, senior public servants, and politicians making claims in various parts of the world. I've seen them make these claims in Washington, D.C. and Paris. And they said, we have world's best practice water management here in Australia in the Murray-Darling Basin. And I've kept on saying that's not true. There are a whole set of issues that we're not dealing with. They're not adapting to the information that we're getting that's telling us that it's not working in terms of we don't have sufficient flows. We need to adjust. We need to respond. We need to do all the sensible things that anybody managing a complex system would do. Get information. Things aren't working. Well, let's respond. But what we get down at the moment is a double down. So you emphasize the point, Philip, that the minister responsible at the moment says that it's all about the drought. I've even heard ministers say it's not it's either the drought or it's the river to blame. Okay, it's not the river, it's not the drought, it's our water management and our water governance. And so it's not world's best practice, but we can make it much better than it is if we just follow some basic rules. And there's some basic rules, like as you manage a small business or as you manage your home or whatever you do, is to actually have to know what's going on. So you have to measure and audit what's happening to the water, who's getting it, where they're getting it, what they're doing with that water. We have to measure what we're spending our money on. So I've mentioned we've spent billions. We've spent $4 billion on water infrastructure for irrigation. So if we spend those amounts of money, then we need to know what do we get for it? How much water do we actually get in terms of stream flows? Those sorts of answers we don't have at the moment. So we clearly
But what we do have and clearly have had is, stupidity verging on criminality.
Well, I would agree with you. I would say it's not stupidity. I think there's a historical pattern here where there's an emergency, and you highlighted in the 1991-92 Darling River blue-green algae. That was over 1,000 kilometers. It started in October, November of 91. It was a major disaster, ecological disaster, which ultimately led to reform, which was good. So they ultimately put a cap on the overall level of extractions, which was at basically the 1993-94 levels of extraction. So it wasn't like, oh, we picked from science the best numbers for optimizing for what we can do for the basin and for the communities, etc. No, it was what was happening in 93-94. So that was a start. There was a movement, and there's been reform since. So it hasn't all been bad. There's been some positive developments. But each time we have a positive development, whether it's the National Water Initiative in 2004, or whether it's Howard announced the National Plan for Water Security with $10 billion in 2007. Every time we move forward, then the backroom boys, if you want to use that term, come in and say, well, how can we manipulate and change this so we actually don't get the reform that people want and actually use this opportunity as an opportunity to help ourselves? And that's essentially what's been happening in water, and it's what's been happening since 2012. And I don't want to be political here.
Barnaby Joyce. Barnaby Joyce.
We had a water minister Okay, he was a deputy prime minister and also a minister of agriculture. That's a conflict of interest. Being a minister
He's also my local member, so watch what you say.
Well, you know, making statements in the Shepparton pub, but I haven't got the quote here, but people may be familiar with that. I mean, that was clearly, you know, operating in a way to look after particular interests. I don't have an issue with people or politicians looking after particular interests, but we also have to look after the national interest and the public interest. And let's be upfront and open about what we're doing. So if the minister responsible today says, well, actually, I'm happy to live with 1 million fish dying off in Menindee Lakes. I'm happy to have dredging of the Murray Mouth, happy to have a decline in birds, I'm happy to have all of this stuff, and people are prepared to vote for me and people sign up to that. Well, at least there's an honesty and transparency about that. But that's not what's happening. As you highlighted, it's, oh, no, it's just the drought. Oh, no, this is just a little temporary situation or event. It's not. We've got to fix this. Let's be honest with people, and it's going to cost, and let's actually do what we need to do. And it's not something that hasn't already been said. You know, I've said it, others have said it, it's been put in writing, it's been delivered to ministers, it's been delivered to public servants. I mean, this has been going on for years behind the scenes, but we haven't got anywhere because particular interests have chosen to stymie it, stop it, and make sure that the reform process looks
Quentin, take a deep breath while I tell everyone who they're listening to and what the program is. The program is LNL on RN, and the Angry Voice belongs to Quentin Grafton. Quentin is a professor at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the ANU, and also wears the hat of Director of the Centre for Water Economics, Environment and Policy. Now, last year, the Senate reduced the amount of water being returned to the environment below that recommended under the plan, even lower than the base level that was already too low.
Yes, this is one of these situations where, as I said, we had reform, we had a vision, and then we backslide to actually get much, much less than what we wanted and what people wanted. So that was an example. So in May of 2018, the Senate, so it was a disallowable motion, but basically what it means is that 605 gigalitres, and that sounds like, you know, a big number, but it's more than all the water in Sydney Harbour, for example, that would not be delivered in terms of direct stream flows, but would be delivered in some magical way with some infrastructure projects, including on the Menindee Lakes. Well, I mean, I think the chances of that delivering increased stream flows equal to 605 gigalitres it's zero.
Now, the Saint Barnaby wanted the limits raised because he thought there would be people selling water rights, but there weren't very many putting their hands up.
Well, so there was legislation, so that again, we would go back and say the best way to actually acquire water for the environment by the federal government is to purchase off willing sellers. I don't mean a compulsory purchase. Willing sellers, offer them a sum of money that would recompense them for their existing water entitlements and then acquire the water entitlements. That's not essentially what we've done. What happened in the legislation in 2014, 2015, we put a maximum cap on how much could be acquired through those sorts of water entitlement purchases. And that was initiated by the coalition government. What they've subsequently done is, of course, is then used the funds to undertake this water infrastructure investments. They call them investments, but essentially that's not going to lead to the stream flows that we want and need to get for the basin. So that again, it's yet again another decision that was taken and wasn't given a lot of attention by the media at the time, but an important decision that sends us backwards in terms of water reform. Yet again, there's a whole range of these decisions.
Very few issues raise the temperature, the human temperature, as much as water politics. I can remember on our little part of the upper Hunter that there were cases of vigilantes smashing each other's pumps under cover of darkness, cutting pipes because water is so damned precious.
It is indeed, Philip, and certainly farmers need water, and we can have both. It's not a case of either or. We can have irrigation in the Murray-Darling Basin, and we can have adequate stream flows. That means that we can get the...
Guess what? We're approaching the upload limit. I'm going to start a new video.